I, 37 male, recently found out that my wife, 35 female, had an affair with our daughter's best friend's father. Let's call him Doug. To begin, my wife and I had been together for 10 years. I thought we had made a good life together. We had a daughter, we had recently bought our first house, and we were planning on buying another. She and I met at a live show at a dive bar in the city, and we ended up spending the rest of the night together. We actually didn't even exchange numbers at the time. We parted ways, and didn't really expect to fall back into each other's lives. Then one day, I was at a small Mediterranean restaurant, and I saw her there. Both of us saw it as a sign. Something was telling us that we were supposed to be together. Ever since we've been inseparable. We bought our house 2 years ago, and moved from the city into the suburbs. Our daughter is 6 years old, so we wanted to make sure she was going to a good school, had a nice yard to play in, and had a good environment to grow up in. She is a stay-at-home mom, but sometimes she takes odd event planning jobs. Her experience in event planning has helped her climb to the top of the PTA committees. She took a lot of pride in the work she did to fundraise for the children. It meant a lot to her. It never would have crossed my mind in a million years that she would have found the opportunity to cheat on me at a PTA meeting, but apparently she did. That's actually how my daughter met her best friend. They weren't in the same class, but my wife and Doug decided that it would be nice for both of the kids to have a playdate. They came over to our house, because we have a large in-ground pool, and the kids wanted to swim in it. When I heard about the playdate, I automatically assumed that it was probably just another mom from the PTA. I was kind of shocked to see Doug there. Now, I know it sounds like I'm some kind of crazy possessive husband, but that isn't the case. It was more of just the surprise of it being a man over a woman. While my wife was in the kitchen, I stopped her and asked her a little more about Doug. I told her that I was surprised to see that it was a man she had been talking about and not another mom, and she just laughed it off and told me that it didn't seem like relevant information to disclose their gender. I thought it was kind of weird for her to try to rationalize not telling me that way, but I trusted her, so I didn't think much more about it. In fact, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and walked out to the pool to get to know Doug a little better. As it turned out, he was working in the same field as I was, and his wife happened to be overseas for a few months on business. He said that he was just happy to have some additional company for his daughter, so he jumped at the opportunity to schedule a playdate. He wasn't even normally involved in the PTA, he was just picking up some of the slack from his wife while she was away. He seemed like a decent enough guy, and knowing that he was married eased some of the concerns I had about him spending time with my wife. Maybe it was just because I was naive or too trusting, but I thought that if I was married and wouldn't give the time of day to another woman, he would probably be the same way. A few weeks had passed, our daughter had really hit it off with Doug's daughter, and they were always wanting to hang out together. Sometimes that would be at our house, sometimes at Doug's, and sometimes they would go to local parks and things like that. During that time, I noticed that I wasn't seeing my wife as much. She was always either busy with some kind of PTA commitment or taking our daughter to hang out with her new best friend. It was a hard thing to complain about because our daughter was so happy to have a friend. However, during the times that they were both home, my wife was distant. She avoided being in the same room as me. She would either go to bed an hour before me or she wouldn't show up until she thought I was asleep. Because of that, one night I pretended to go to sleep and I waited for her to show up. When she finally did, I surprised her with all of my concerns. I didn't even bring up anything in an accusatory way. I was simply asking her if there was something wrong in our marriage so we could find a way to fix it. When I brought up completely nonchalantly that it seemed like she spent more time with Doug than she did with me, she deflected and told me that she would spend less time with them. But she told me that I had to tell her daughter why she wasn't able to see her friend anymore. Then she went on a rant about how much it would hurt her. I was very annoyed with how she was trying to make me seem like a bad guy just for wanting to spend time with my family, so I just left. I went into my office to get some work done, but as I was there I replayed the conversation in my head, and in hindsight there was something very off about it. You would think that just asking someone to spend time with their family wouldn't result in a huge argument, but when I mentioned Doug she just got defensive. I let my curiosity get the better of me and I logged into her email. We have an open password policy, so she knew all of my passwords and I knew all of hers. Because of that we also know our account usernames and information like that. Her email was pretty much clean. The only thing I noticed was a security alert for another email account. You know, like the ones that you get when you have a backup email associated with another account. This told me that she had another email account I knew nothing about. At first I thought it might have been a PTA email, but when I looked through the other messages it seemed like she was doing her PTA business through her personal account. I couldn't think of a reason she would have another email account. Fortunately for me, because she had her main email as her backup, I was able to change the password on the new one and log in. Right away I knew I was right to check. There weren't many emails, but there was a chain between her and Doug where they were having very explicit conversations with each other. Pictures were exchanged, dates were set, and some serious promises were being made. On top of that, there were a lot of order confirmations for things like lingerie and sex toys, none of which had seen at all. From the looks of it, they were both planning on leaving their partners and being together. Doug didn't want to risk his assets, so he had to be strategic about leaving, and my wife never said anything about it, but I was certain she would have wanted to come out on top in the divorce. I printed everything as soon as I saw it. If she wanted a divorce, she would get one, but it would not pan out the way she thought. I would make sure of that. I slept in my office that night because I just couldn't stand to be by her, but in the morning I called out of work and met with a divorce attorney to get the process started. It took a couple of weeks to get the papers ready, so in the meantime I pretended like everything was hunky-dory back home, but when the papers were ready I knew exactly how I wanted to serve them to her. She left for her usual weekly PTA meeting and I stayed behind with our daughter. What she didn't know is that I hired a sitter to watch her and I followed her there. After a few minutes I walked in while the meeting was already taking place. She was shocked to see me there. The president of the PTA welcomed me and asked me to introduce myself to the rest of the group. I stood up, told them all that I was my wife's husband, then corrected myself to soon-to-be ex-husband. She was clearly confused about that, but everybody else in the room was suddenly very interested in what I had to say. My wife had told me they were all quite gossipy. I looked between her and Doug and handed her the envelope I brought with me containing the divorce papers and all of the evidence I found of her affair. Then I turned to the rest of the PTA and explained what I meant. They were all shocked. One of them even spoke up and asked Doug about his wife. Apparently a lot of the women in the room had been good friends with his wife. One of them stopped me as I was leaving and asked me more about what I found. She wanted to make sure Doug's wife knew so she could also take the appropriate actions. She ended up giving me her cell phone number so I could call her and explain everything. In the end, my wife and Doug did end up together. Doug's wife divorced him, and because he cheated she was able to keep the house, the cars, and most of their assets and still receive child support and alimony payments from him. I would venture to guess that Doug was paying out more than half of his paychecks to his wife. When my wife realized that both she and Doug would be out of luck since they were caught, she begged me to forgive her and take her back. She kept trying to remind me of all the good times we had, but I didn't listen. I went through with the divorce and she got absolutely nothing from me. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment with Doug while I kept everything else. I ended up selling the house and moving back to my hometown so my mom could help me out with some childcare while I was still working. It actually seems to have been for the best because now my daughter gets to spend time with all of her cousins around her age. She has more friends here than she did in our old town. I do still keep in touch with Doug's ex-wife because our daughters are still friends. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through with that. You had your gut feeling that something was wrong, and several times she tried to lie to you and convince you that you were in the wrong. I think the most upsetting part of this was her telling you to explain to your daughter why she couldn't see her friend. That was manipulative and a major red flag on her part. I'm glad you were able to get the evidence to ensure neither you nor Doug's wife were taken advantage of in the divorce. It's a shame that it had to end the way it did, but it's good that you're both out of those relationships. I wish you both nothing but the best in the future. Now let's move on to our next story. My wife, 30 female, and I had been together for 10 years, ever since our college days. We were one of those couples who finished each other's sentences and made others gag with envy. We both graduated and got right out into the job field and were kind of crushed by reality. Neither of us ended up being able to work in our dream fields, and we were constantly trying to find ways to be happy outside of work. After the pandemic, things only got harder for us, but thankfully we made it through a dark time and we came out stronger in the end. I landed a good job at a new tech startup and things started to change for us. Now here's the thing. My wife had always been secretly dreaming of becoming an actress, so I surprised her with acting classes thinking it would be a cool way for her to dip her toes in the world of acting. Little did I know that this seemingly harmless decision would unleash a whirlwind of drama in her lives. At first everything seemed pretty normal. She was all in attending those classes, staying up late to rehearse scenes and fully embracing her newfound passion. I was genuinely excited for her, watching her realize one of her dreams. After a few months of classes, things took a turn. The classes usually started in the evening. I'd gotten used to her coming home around 10 or 11, but as time went on she was coming back later and later. She started to distance herself from me emotionally and physically. I noticed she was tilting her phone away from me when she'd look at it, and she'd walk out of the room to take phone calls. All of those are telltale signs of cheating. If something was going on, I wanted to know. I worked up the courage one day to finally sit down and ask her what was going on. I explained all of my concerns and told her that if there was something going on she should tell me so we could find a way to work through it, but she just denied everything. She told me that she was just exhausted from working and taking the classes and that I had nothing to worry about. For a few days after the conversation, I think she took it to heart and she started to act like her old self, but that quickly went away and the same issues we had resurfaced. I just have this nagging feeling that would not leave me alone and that something was wrong. I couldn't ignore the signs she was displaying, so I thought that if she wasn't going to tell me, I would have to find out. I ended up hiring a private detective to follow her to one of her acting classes to see if they found anything. He kept me updated throughout the night while he was watching her, and for a while it seemed fine. He sent me a message telling me the acting class was over, but my wife was walking across the street to a bar with a man from the class. He kept an eye on them while they were there, then after about 45 minutes he told me they were leaving. They were holding hands and cuddling while they were walking down the street. He followed them to a townhouse and they both went inside. He waited for a while, but the blinds were closed, so he couldn't really see anything that was going on inside. That was all the evidence I needed to try to do some digging on my own. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but now I pretty much knew that she was cheating on me, so I gave myself the go-ahead. I logged into her Facebook account, that was where she had her acting group chat and where she did a majority of her messaging. I looked through all the members of her acting class chats and searched through them all to try to find the man she was with. I found him pretty quickly, and when I looked through their messages it confirmed all of my suspicions. They had been exchanging very flirty, explicit messages, and they had been planning dates together. From the context of the messages, they had slept together many times. I dismissed the PI and made a plan to end the marriage. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was heartbroken and completely distraught by the news. I even gave her an out for it. She had plenty of opportunities to tell me the truth and not lie about it. The more I thought about how badly she hurt me, the more I wanted to get even with her. It all started because of the acting class, so I wanted it all to end there too. I remembered she told me when she first joined the class the instructor had her perform a monologue on her first day, so I prepared one. I signed up for the class, shelling out the money for a trial of it, and practiced what I was going to say. I made sure to arrive later than everyone else and sit in the very back of the auditorium while everybody else mingled ahead of me. After a while the instructor stood on the stage and called me up. Everybody turned to look at me, but I kept my eyes trained on my wife as I walked to the stage. The absolute confusion on her face was priceless. I introduced myself and waved at my wife while the spotlight was shining on me. Then I read my monologue. It wasn't exactly a monologue per se. It was just me reading some highlight quotes from the messages I found between her and the other guy. She stood up and tried to get me to walk off the stage, but I ignored her. I ended the scene by telling her that we would be getting a divorce and that I was no longer paying for her classes. As it turns out, the guy she was cheating on me with happened to be sleeping around with a couple of other girls in the class. There was a complete uproar when I explained what was going on. Everyone was yelling at him and calling him names. I walked out to let that play out on its own, but my wife chased after me. Even with all the evidence that I had just read to her, she tried to tell me that they were rehearsing for a play. She tried to tell me that the text messages were just acting. I was flabbergasted by her poor attempts at lying. Really, I thought the money I'd spent on those classes might have paid off a little bit more. I told her she had a week to get her things out of her house and that she would be getting official papers from me soon. I stayed with a friend while she was moving out, but I did find out through the grapevine that the man she was cheating on me with was kicked out of the class because of all the chaos he caused. We're currently going through our divorce proceedings. It's definitely all panning out in my favor though. The best part about this is that she can't afford acting classes on her own, so she's no longer able to pursue that dream. OP, I'm sorry you had to go through all of that. She continued to lie to you about your concerns and made you feel invalidated about them. You were right to be suspicious and you did the right thing by hiring a PI. The scene you performed in front of the class was a great idea to get back at her. It's not surprising that the man she was cheating on you with was also with other women in the class. I can't help but wonder if they tried to pursue anything after or if she viewed it as him cheating on her too. It seems like karma for her to have been surprised by the news. I wish you the best of luck in the divorce and I hope you're able to move on from her quickly. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened.